Welcome back. It is Bones, and in this one, let's go ahead and take a quick look at some repainting that I have done on the Injustice 2 Superman from McFarlane's DC Multiverse collection. Now, I have to say, this has honestly been a very surprising figure. Just cannot state how much fun I've had with him. Even the regular release has been a lot of fun to play around with and pose. But all that made me do was actually want to do a little bit of custom repainting to one of these figures. Because although the standard release does look pretty cool to the untrained eye, there are a couple of things that I dislike about that figure. Basically, the lack of detailed paint, and this means that the original release just comes off looking a little bit more plasticky than I would like, and that is because it's basically molded in a certain color blue plastic and then just added on with metallic blue and a little bit of reds. Now, this is fine to your basic consumer. I can see picking up this Injustice 2 Superman and just putting them, on your shelf and being satisfied with that. But of course, me, I always like to add my own little details to make these figures just pop a little bit more, come to life a little bit more, and make them more to my own satisfaction. Now, of course, when these figures are $20, it's not hard to do this. And depending on which figure and character it is, I may just buy one or two or three or even four. But that being said, let's go ahead and take a closer look at this guy and some of the differences that I added for my own custom repaint figure. Now, we must understand, first of all, I want to get this out of the way, and that is that a head swap isn't a custom figure. I mean, technically it is, but we all know that it is not, because a head swap can, anybody with a one brain cell could do, because you just warm it up, pop off the head, and, switch it over to another figure. So, I mean, me personally, I don't necessarily consider those customs. Those are just head swaps. Now, it's easy to discern between the two. A custom figure is added a little bit more paint, or added some sort of sculpting detail, or added parts from another figure, and then repainting it to make it all look as one complete figure. Now, a head swap is just a simple head swap. That's fine. A custom repaint is actually just repainting the figure, but not adding any other details or changing out parts, like using different limbs or adding little sculpted details and then painting it to match the actual figure. So this right here is just a custom repaint, because I didn't add anything else. I just changed the paint. Now, if I were to call this a complete custom repaint, that would be because I would add something else, added details, or change out the boots for different boots, which I have done on other figures. In fact, if you go in to look at my different videos, I usually do these little custom repaints. I've done Parallax. I also did Bane. I did a whole custom of him because, of course, I have 3 Banes, so I could play around with 2 of them. Now let's go ahead and take a look at them. This was actually a process because, as everybody knows, I'm not really big on doing like tutorials or videos about how I do things. Because once I start doing them, I forget to record them. A lot of times all I get is pictures. So I had a couple of things I wanted to do with this figure. So first things first, we always completely disassemble the figure depending on what we want to do. But basically, for a custom repaint, it's a lot easier just to separate him into his different parts. Now, what I wanted to do was add some metallic blue paint, because of course the standard release was just molded in a really light blue plastic. And I thought this guy deserved to have a little bit more of a metallic sheen to him. And the way that the standard release looks just kind of plain doesn't add anything to the eye, to where you could see, little grooves and little accents of paint. Plus, I had seen some images of the character online. where I saw a couple of details that I actually wanted to add to my custom repaint. Now, the I know this is going to set off a lot of, alarms, and people, get crazy on me. But one thing I really wanted to do was add side eye to this figure. And the reason I wanted to do this is because the original release just has that sort of, zombie looking straight forward, no life mannequin eyes. And just like die cuts that I didn't used to really notice, once I saw how a thigh cut looks really horrible, every figure that has a thigh cut, it's like my eye just goes directly to that disgusting thigh cut, and I just cannot look away. And now when I look at figures, I see that, blank, expressionless stare, and I see it right away. So it does work on some figures, just like I think that side eye works on some figures. Now, you do have to have the side eye pointed to the right direction. I remember the Battinson Batman. That was one of the first times we actually saw side eye. But where they messed up is that they put the side eye to the wrong direction, to where when he held up his grapnel gun, he was looking the opposite way. Another thing is, I'm not necessarily a big fan of like deep side eye that came with like the Lex Luthor figure. And although it does work, the problem with that is that it's just too much side eye, to where it's really difficult to get him into any other poses because of how drastic the side eye is. So I'm more of like, I like a skew eye, which means that you're not necessarily looking straight forward into the void, but you do have a little bit of, eye turned a little bit, just to give you some life and some essence, to where it doesn't look just so, zombie-ish. I know that a lot of people don't agree with me, but that's fine. We don't have to agree on everything. I have my own opinions. I live my own life, and I have my own preferences. So it's not a big deal. Don't take this as like I'm attacking straight eyes, because I'm not. I know they're pretty much, for the history of action figures and probably moving forward, straight eyes is just the way it's been. But I like to be a little bit different, and I like to do my own things. And I actually see the beauty, and I have an open mind when I see the side eye on a figure. So that was like the main thing I wanted to do with this one, aside from add some paint detail, a little bit of dark wash, and even some highlights, which I don't normally do, but I just thought it would work for this figure. Now, I have to say, this has been a pretty surprising figure. I've actually spent a lot of time with him in the recent weeks, ever since I picked him up. But after rambling on for a while, let's go ahead and get into it. Now, there was a couple of details that I wanted to add that were pretty simple. Like, I wanted to add gold on the gloves behind the hands, because I saw images where he actually had that detail. And then underneath the shoulder pauldrons, you have this sort of chevron styled, detail. And I did see images where it actually had silver on the top, and then that yellow gold, sort of bronze gold on the bottom. So I did add that detail as well. Now, another thing I wanted to do was the headgear, the harness that he has around his head. On the original release, it's more of just like a silver, where I kind of wanted it to match a little bit more of that like copper, yellow, gold that he has on the rest of the costume. So I did go ahead and change that. And one of the main things I did was actually add a darker metallic blue to, like, not on the armored parts of the figure, but actually on this textured undergarment that he has. That's where I actually added the darker blue paint. Now, I did give a quick wash of metallic red on the boots, because they kind of looked a little bit like translucent, or like sort of cheap plastic to me. So I did give them a spray of metallic red, and that actually did work in like masking that sort of transparent look and making them look just a little bit more shinier. And then finally, I had to tackle the head of the figure, which was by far going to be the hardest part. Now, I did do the hair, in which I added a lot of blue highlights into the hair. And I actually added a lot of matte black to kind of dye down the black that's on the original standard release is just a little bit too plastic looking for me, too shiny. So I dyed it down a little bit with some matte black, and then I added the blue highlights. Adjusted his hairline a little bit just to not have that big peak right here in the split between his hair. And then I finally attacked the eyes. Now, it is kind of a little bit of a science to add side eyes to straight looking forward eyes, because I do use some of the paint that's actually there and I add on to that and then put the eyes the way I want them. And once I got them kind of facing in the direction that I wanted, I actually added red and a little bit of yellow just to give them that heat, that heat vision looks that I think Superman gets a little bit more of a vengeful or like hatred feel to him when he has those heat vision eyes, or a more intense look. So I wanted him to have that look. I think it came out pretty nice. Now, one more thing that I did do is I added a lot of shading and paint to the actual face. Now, the reason I did this is because, once again, the original release kind of looks like caked on makeup. It doesn't have any lines or shadows or depth. So I went ahead and did it. And you can actually see where, when the light hits my version, right away he starts getting some, brow shadow or like shadow around the lips. And the original release just looks like plastic, or or like I said, like cake frosting, just like plastered on there with no, shadows or anything. So this just gives him a more realistic look. And I would have to say that this figure actually looks a lot just like a statue. Like if you were to pose him on some sort of like rooftop diorama and have him standing in a pose, to someone that didn't know any different, he would look pretty much like a statue, which is pretty awesome because he's actually articulated. He has pretty good articulation. I would say the only negative about the articulation for this figure, I mean, he has movement everywhere except in the waist. Now, he does lean back per usual with McFarlane, but he doesn't have that much of a front crunch. Now, there is a way to get around this, and you can pop him apart and actually mod him to give him front crunch. It's not actually a hard thing to do, but the thing that is hard is to actually get the sections popped apart, but you can do it if you would like to do that. Now, for me, it's not really a big deal because I do not think that this character needs to actually be getting in like crazy splits or crazy contortionist poses. He's just fine, in a flight pose or standing stoically or a little bit tyrannical looking at you. And the side eye just gives him that little bit of attitude that I really like in a figure. This is just my preference. So it's not necessarily that you have to do this or anything. I'm just trying to say that there is something to having side eye that actually works if it's used in the correct mode. Now, once I was done with him, I actually wasn't done with him, which is really interesting. I actually went back and added some gunmetal to the shoulders and to the thigh guards to make that blue metal actually pop a little bit more. It just gave it a whole new sheen, which really works with the figure. So I was actually even more satisfied by adding that little metallic shine to the armored portions of it. Then I also painted the shoulder rings, which you could actually kind of see there, where the original release are like sort of baby blue. These I have more of a metallic blue, underneath all that armor. And then one other thing I did do is I actually added a dark wash to the textured portion of the costume, because at first I just painted it metallic blue, but I just still felt like it needed a little bit, something more, like some grain, like some kind of texture to it. And once you put that black wash, it really brings out all the little grooves and all the little details of the costume. So I thought that worked really well. And finally, I still wasn't done, and I went back with a sort of feather brush, and you dip it into some silver, and you just sort of brush it, sporadically all over the costume. and different highlights of the armor, and it just gives it a little bit of sort of worn, like he's actually battled and he's actually had some fights and some scrapes, and just gives him a lot more life. And like I said, when you see this figure just standing there or in a cool pose, he looks awesome. Now, as I said, I do have one standard release without any changes. And, putting them side by side, you can actually really see the difference, not only in the color, but the details and the way the faces look completely different. Whereas this one looks just plain with not really any emotion or any character to him. This one with the side eye actually has that evilness sort of peeking out behind those red heat vision eyes. So as I said before, I'm not putting down the standard release. That's a great figure if you want to pick it up for $20 and add it to your shelf. But this is just something I wanted to do, that I wanted to have in my collection, just a more detailed. Once you add that detail, you have a little bit more fun and can put him in some more situations and poses, and just has a lot more life to him. Now, do not despair. I also picked up one in box, so that way I can still add this one to my mint in box collection. And this is basically what happens when you don't care what anybody thinks. You end up buying, multiples of figures that you really enjoy and having fun, which is basically what this is supposed to be. It's just something enjoyable to collect, to hunt, and to customize. But you guys keep hunting out there, keep collecting, keep customizing, and I will see you on the next one.
They used to call me Crazy Joe, but now they can call me Fat Man.